Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at the Hoka Mach X. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say that these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. I was really excited to get this in the mail, mainly because I think this is a big step in the right direction for Hoka as far as kind of coming out with new, more exciting models that use something other than basically traditional EVA foam. Now, this is positioned as a faster daily trainer or potential race day shoe for some runners with its new Pebax-based plate. The Mach X costs $180, and for some reason, Hoka changed the sample size that they use to provide all their statistics. Typically, it's done in a men's size 9, and for this new Mach X, they decided to provide all the stats in a men's size 10. So with that being said, the shoe comes in at 9.4 ounces, has 39 millimeters in the heel, 34 in the forefoot for that classic 5 millimeter heel to toe drop. And if you compare this to like a men's size 9, I try to do the math, it comes in at like 9.1 ounces, which is rather heavy for a shoe in this fast daily training / race day shoe category. So it's light in general, but when you kind of compare it to its particular category, it's going to be on the heavier end of things. And just to put things into perspective, the Mach X is going to be about a full ounce heavier compared to the brand new Rocket X2, which is Hoka's premier race day super shoe. The upper is the same kind of material we see on the Clifton 9. It's acrylic jacquard mesh. There's a lot of different components that kind of all work together to create a single layer of upper that is very consistent and incredibly comfortable. The outer part of the upper is a very fine synthetic-like mesh, and then that's fused directly to a more traditional fabric-like engineered mesh with really large holes, and again, creates a very single consistent layer. And then they have some cool kind of stitching or kind of overlays, if you will, that create a very intricate design. And again, I really do like this upper. It fits true to size, doesn't feel overly restrictive, and I think does a good job of letting your foot breathe, especially as we get into some of these hotter months. The tongue is on the more minimal side of things and is gusseted. You have a large strip of fabric on the lateral and medial side, which keeps the tongue in place. And because it is so thin, they added a small piece of felt towards the top, rather soft. I found it to work quite well, no issues. Sometimes when you have these more minimal, thinner tongues, you can kind of cut into your leg or just become a little bit annoying, and that was not the case here at all. They also added a small rectangular foam block down the center of the tongue to help reduce lace pressure, and I think this does a great job. So you get a more minimal tongue, but you also get a little bit of padding, and I do like that balance. The laces are a bit different. They have a synthetic, kind of plasticky-like feel to them, and they did work quite well. Sometimes when you get these unique laces, they slide apart rather easily, and that was not the case here. If we move to the back of the shoe, you have a minimal amount of padding. I found it to be quite comfortable, and the heel counter is relatively stiff. I will say the lockdown here is superb, didn't have any heel lift or anything like that. I do like this setup with the acrylic jacquard mesh, the tongue with the foam block, and just the solid heel counter with a light to moderate amount of padding. It feels like it should for a shoe in this faster daily trainer race day category. The midsole is a dual density setup, and we finally get a PEBA foam here, which is going to be a lot lighter and bouncier compared to EVA foam, which is what Hoka has traditionally used for most of their running shoes. Now, this dual density setup has pros and cons. The pros, it's going to be a bit more stable. The cons, you don't feel the PEBA foam if it was just purely a PEBA-based midsole like we see on the Rocket X2. If we take a look here, you have that white EVA foam comes up a bit on the heel. You kind of get these like stability walls and then swoops closer down to the forefoot. The cream-colored foam, which sits right below your forefoot, is the PEBA foam that goes towards the back directly underneath your heel. And sandwiched in between these two different layers of foam is what Hoka is calling their Pebax propulsion plate. If you flip the shoe over, you can see the little cutout and that teal plate in the middle there. Now, this is going to be less aggressive compared to a carbon fiber plate, which means the plate has a bit more give to it, and it's just going to be a little bit more flexible, so just not as stiff. And of course, the plate really helps highlight the early stage meta rocker technology, basically just the geometry of the midsole where it's curved towards the front of the shoe and rolls you forward and keeps you going. The plate gives you that stiffness to really take advantage of an aggressive toe off, especially if you're trying to pick up the pace, which this shoe is designed for. And as a fun side note, at least according to Hoka, the PEBA-based foam is going to be 34% more resilient compared to the ProFly X foam we see on the Carbon X3, and I'll just go ahead and say this PEBA based foam with the setup here is much softer, so at least according to Hoka, it's going to be more resilient as well. I will say this is a fun and fast option. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. Super easy to pick up the pace in and just feels incredible underfoot. There's a couple caveats I'll talk about in a second, but kind of a similar comparison I'll say, or like a subtle comparison, is like the Hoka Mach 5, where you have that top layer of bouncy foam and a rather kind of firm base underneath. It's a nice kind of balance, if you will. The big difference here is a lot more cushion. You have that Pebax base plate through the midsole. It's nice to have a different option where it's not super stiff and rigid, kind of gives you a different level to train at, if you will. But again, super easy to pick up the pace in. I will say, even though this is an extremely fun shoe to run in, that EVA foam frame does restrict the PEBA experience. It's not going to be as expressive or as bouncy compared to what we see on the implementation with the Rocket X2. Now, this has some trade-offs. The positive is you're going to have additional stability. This is a neutral shoe, and I wouldn't say it's a super stable option, but it's going to be much more stable compared to if it was all just PEBA foam. And that's partly because you have this kind of foam wall towards the back of the heel, and then some like medial support as well. And this does help wrangle in that very soft PEBA foam. And because we have that EVA foam frame, it is going to make this shoe on the heavier side of things, around that 9.1 ounce mark for a men's size 9 and like 9.4 for a men's size 10, which, like I mentioned before in the video, is a heavier, fast daily trainer and definitely a heavy race day shoe. So just keep that in mind when you're taking a look at it, but I really do like how this performs. Moving on to the outsole, we have a solid amount of rubber coverage here. The lugs are extremely tiny. It's a rather smooth outsole pattern. They did add some more rubber to the lateral edge of the heel for added durability. Thought the grip is fine, a little bit of slipping and sliding on some of the wetter surfaces, but other than that, it feels very much kind of like a traditional, faster race day shoe. I really like what Hoka is doing here with the Mach X. It's a good move in the right direction, and while it's not perfect, I do think it's going to find itself in a lot of people's shoe rotations, including mine. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, Ryan, you said the shoe isn't perfect, so what would you change to make it perfect? Well, talked about this before in the video. It comes down to two things. One, I think it weighs a little bit too much for this space. I would bring that down. And the second thing is I want to feel a little bit more of that PEBA-based foam. I realize there needs to be some daylight between the Mach X and the Rocket X2, but they can do this kind of two birds in one stone, if you will. Remove some of that EVA foam while it helps kind of wrangle in the PEBA and give it a bit more stability. I don't think they need this much. You could also reduce the EVA substantially and maybe do something with that Pebax base plate, maybe add some stability wings or other configurations, or swap out the EVA foam for something else entirely that's maybe a bit more dense and stable, but also has a bit more balance and a life to it. I would like to see them kind of get a bit creative, but I do think they could bring down the EVA foam just a bit to lighten it up and liven it up in the midsole. But with all that being said, this is a solid, fast daily trainer, and I quite like it. Just happy to see different new options come out, especially from Hoka, who has absolutely blown up in recent years. The other thing I'll say is this isn't a casual shoe. I probably wouldn't wear this around like the Clifton or the Bondi or things like that. This is definitely a dedicated running shoe. So if you're a sneakerhead, I probably wouldn't pick this up for casual wear. This is definitely a dedicated running shoe. But overall, it's a big winner. I like it a lot. I'd be curious to see what you guys think, so let me know down in the comments. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.